scarlet on our couch. She never wore red. We didn't own scarves. It lay across the middle cushion, folded once, like a decision. The cushion kept a shallow dip. A water ring dulled the glass on the coffee table. The remote rested face down, edge over the brink, a slide halted by luck. Someone had arranged this place without caring how we arrange it. I stood over the fabric without touching. A loose thread hung from the seam, snapped clean. The scent wasn't ours. Our bottles sit capped and unused. This came in from the hallway and sat to be noticed. The door chain sat where I left it in the morning. Hinges silent. Mat undisturbed. Mail still stacked. Rubber band tight. No footprints in the dust line by the baseboard. Whoever entered left no weight on the floor. Only on the couch. My phone lit and cooled again. Cycling silence. Her chat pinned at the top. No one today. Time stamped an hour ago. Read receipts disabled. Location grayed out. A blank pin floating nowhere. The room corrected the message. I pinched the end of the scarf and lifted an inch. Silk, tight weave, cool as a coin. The tag named a boutique we've never stepped into. It didn't by itself. I put it back, not as I found it. I turned it lengthwise, bright edge toward the door, a stripe across the room. I took a photo with the clock blinking in frame, then set the phone on the table, screen awake. No confusion later. The place went still again. The hallway hummed behind the door, then quieted. No calls. No keys. No apology text breaking the surface. I let the scarf watch the door. The lock turned slow, careful, like a hand hovering over hot metal. She eased the door, shoes in hand, eyes down, breath held. The stripe of fabric cut across her path. She stepped over it without looking. She saw the glow on the table and paused, then pretended not to. Her keys slid into the bolt too quietly. Her bag grazed the chair and hung there, not committed to the floor. She chose no sound. She went to the sink first, always a tell. Water loud, longer than needed, wrists stacked under the stream. I watched her shoulders square before she turned it off. Clean is easier than honest. Late, I said, voice flat against the room. She reached for a towel and missed it once, then found it. Traffic, she said, the word landing light, a feather on concrete. Streets don't run their own alibis. She smoothed her hair and glanced at the clock like it accused her. The blinking digits had the time I wanted on them. She lifted the towel again, buying seconds that weren't for drying. Clock truth doesn't blink. Her eyes skimmed the table, then the stripe, then away. Her breathing shortened, then reset, like a machine calibrating. She kicked a shoe under the chair and left the other out, an odd pair to trip on. Careless as a costume. I stood, slow, letting chair legs mark the floor. She flinched at the sound, then smiled a shape with no voice in it. Hungry? She asked, already moving toward the kitchen without waiting. Feeding is safer than explaining. I followed and stayed by the doorway, not close enough to touch. She opened a cabinet and took out a glass she never used. Her hand trembled once before the faucet steadied it. The wrong cup never forgets. What did Jess say? I asked, tracing the rim of the table with a finger. She froze a breath, then let it go through her nose, measured. She's stressed, she said, shoulder tipping like a shrug got stuck. Friends absorbed convenient hours. She sipped water she didn't need, throat working too hard for a small swallow. Her phone lit in her bag, a muted buzz scratching the cloth. She didn't reach for it, which told me more than if she had. Silence can be trained. I set the spoon on the counter, handle aligned with the tile grid. I wiped a circle that didn't need wiping, a clean ring on clean stone. She watched the movement without turning her head. Patterns punished drift. She walked back to the couch and stopped at the stripe. She bent, fingers hovering, then lifted it with 2 fingers like a specimen. She turned it crosswise, short edge toward the door again, restoring a lie's pose. I let her fix it. She sat, knees together, hands folded on top like a patient in a waiting room. The glass made a wet crescent on the table and slid a millimeter. She aligned the base to cover it, then folded her hands again. She hates marks. You changed it, I said, looking at the scarf, not her. Her eyes didn't move, but her jaw worked once, a quiet muscle ticking. It looked wrong, she said, as if shape had ethics. Order is a confession. I reached for the phone and tapped the screen, light opening across us. The photo filled it, time-stamped clean, striped bright, a record no one invited. I set it back down, screen lit, face up between us. Seeing sits where you place it. We watched the light soak the table. Her hands stayed in her lap. My screen hummed a faint heat against the wood. The room held its breath and counted. Silence learns fast. I slid the scarf to the edge and brought it back until the stripes sat where the photo said. The weave matched the pixels. Her eyes tracked the motion once, a blink that landed late. Precision has a sound. What else looked wrong? I said, and I kept my hands still. She pressed her thumb into the seam of the chair and made a small dent that disappeared. That wasn't an answer. Her phone pulsed against her pocket, a short, nervous tremor. She took it out and set it face down. I turned it over with 2 fingers and let the preview speak for her. The sentence she sent was still trying to be private. She reached for it and stopped halfway, hand hovering above the glass. The reflection of her palm rained across the lock screen. She chose the next move by not moving at all. Say it here, I said, and I slid my phone beside hers until both screens became one field. She looked at the join, not at me. Bravery likes corners. I opened her thread and didn't scroll far. Avatars stared up with eyelashes and drinks. The line glared, time-stamped and clean. She had written it from this couch. You're twisting this, she said, voice low, like telling a child to sleep. She reached for reasons that wore my name, fingers grazing late shifts and closed doors. It was an old play. The radiator had been bumped to a new schedule that didn't fit my mornings. The mirror above the shoe rack was tilted, a degree off the nail. A heart drawn in the dust of the windowsill had a wipe through the center, hiding leaves grooves. I set the photo of the hallway on the table, 2 frames a day apart. The small rug was rotated a quarter turn, pattern line no longer pointing at the door. 2 steps can betray a room. Her throat moved once. She stood and walked to the sink, turned the tap, and let the water run without a glass. The stream hit the steel and made a thin scream. Noise keeps hands busy. Monday, I said, watching her back, the soft dress pulling straight between her shoulders. 21:13. She kept her head down. Time draws its own map. Don't do this, she said, shut the water, and dried her fingers on the dish towel that usually hung on the oven handle. Today it was on the chair. The towel had chosen a side. I tapped the names in her thread and highlighted them one by one. The blue circles waited. I didn't press call. Consequence learns patience. You weren't alone, I said, and I let the edge sit in the air, not sharpened, not dulled. The chair across from me kept a deeper dent than my weight could make. Furniture keeps score. She stepped back to the table and placed both palms on it, flat, as if she could stop it from shifting. Her jaw set into its quiet answer. Position is admission. We can keep it in this room, I said, and I lifted her phone an inch, enough to feel the pull of her gaze. Or we can bring your audience. Choice is a small door. She kept her palms flat. I let the silence run until it hit the wall. Then I lifted the phone to her face. She turned her chin a degree. I matched it, close enough to measure breath. The lock opened on a white flash. Faces are permissions. I slid to the thread with their headshots in a neat row. The name of the chat was a joke that aged badly. I scrolled once, then twice, until the words found the shape of the room we stood in. I tapped the camera icon. Crowds fit in a palm, she said. Don't, soft and level, and reach, not for the phone, but for the placemat beside it. Her thumb traced its woven edge. The ring sound pinched the room at each interval. I leaned the phone against the water glass and tilted it to include the dent in the rug. Calls make angles sharp. First face came in from a kitchen glow, hair pulled high, a spoon paused midair. Second joined in a parking lot with dome light on, seatbelt still across her. The third let the camera open on ceiling, then adjusted until an eye appeared. They saw me first, then the furniture, then her hands. The connection clarified their pulse. I didn't ask if they could hear. I looked at her, then back to the lens. You brought them in, I said, and set a fingertip on the glass to steady the frame. The delay caught the sentence twice. Echoes are a kind of witness. The one in the kitchen unmuted, then muted again. The parking lot girl opened her mouth and closed it on the same breath. Ceiling I moved once and stopped moving. Their stillness stacked. Distance runs out of places. I flicked the screen to the camera roll. Opened a photo of a street sign at 1:13 a.m., the corner we never use. I held up the call log with a cluster of midnight rings labeled unknown, same number recycles. A screenshot of do not disturb, toggled off at 2:04. Her calendar with a block labeled yoga, next to a restaurant receipt. I didn't explain the timestamps. Patterns speak louder than defense. Check your mail, I said, and set my thumb on the side button. The scheduled send knew this minute would arrive. Their eyes dropped for the same second like birds startled the same way. Distribution is impartial. She lifted her palms from the table and flattened them on her thighs. She tracked the path of a loose thread down the seam of her jeans and snapped it clean. Then she met the lens for a half second, not me. That half second was the speech she didn't give. The parking lot window fogged from her breath. We don't need this, she managed, eyes flicking to someone off screen. The other two stayed on mute. Their faces read each other's cues and found no script. Silence doesn't defend. We keep it here, I said, and tapped the phone back toward us, cutting the frame to her and the table. The friends stayed, small and multiplied, watching. Air moved across the room and the glass hummed against ceramic. Audience makes people hold their spines. You said blind, I added, and let my hand fall to my side. So watch. The word sat in the middle of the call like a chair no one wanted. Seeing has weight. I picked up the phone, turned the camera outward, and walked it past the hall mirror with its fine crack, the scuffed baseboard by the door, the unused suitcase under the bench. I brought it back to the room and set it between us like a timer. Endings develop in plain view. The call sat on the table, faces stacked in tiny circles, breathing through the speaker. She tucked hair behind her ear without touching it. I angled the phone to the baseboard, tracing the gouge with a key. A bag dragged when she came home late. Weight leaves marks. I pulled the drawer, held up the spare key hook. One hook full, one empty. She watched the empty one as if it might grow. I set down a duplicate with a nick by the shoulder and a smooth, machine-cut edge. The ring was new. The teeth weren't. The house learned another hand. I opened my notes on the screen and let the light hit her wrist. Rides at 2:17, 1:43, 3:05. Same corner. Different nights. The thermostat graph showed an 8-degree jump at 3:29, followed by silence at 4:12. Rooms announce arrivals even when shoes come off. Patterns confess. I moved the phone to the mirror, placed my thumb on the crack she never noticed aloud. The yoga mat in the closet had clay under it, gray and drying. Her class was on hardwood. I held the mat up for the shot and let the dust fall to the floor. Stories shed residue. She reached for the phone with 2 fingers, then pulled back like it was wet. Stop, she said, but the word landed behind me. I set a folded receipt next to her hand, coffee from a place across the river. 10 stamps. Our cards were full elsewhere. Blind men don't chart shadows. I lifted the bench lid. The suitcase waited like a sealed sentence. I unzipped it and showed the empty liner, then slid in the envelope with the lease addendum and a letter from the locksmith. My toothbrush lay beside it in a zip bag. Exits are made. One of them spoke through a throat-cleared whisper. This is cruel. I watched her mouth tighten then settle. I turned the camera to the wall where paint ran a shade darker near the outlet. Phone charger moved 3 inches over time. Small drifts tell the tide. She isn't the only audience. She stood. The chair said goodbye to the floor. I placed her key on the table, metal on wood, no speech attached. You became distant, I said steady, because euphemisms are bridges. You'll take what you own. I'll handle the rest. This is the part you see. She nodded without moving her head, like the nod was interior. I silenced the call but left it open. They could stare at the ceiling and learn its lines. She went to the closet and touched every hanger before choosing nothing. Selection can be refusal. Seeing has no pause button. I picked up the phone and faced it outward again. Hallway. Shoes lined by size. The doormat still holding last weekend's grit. The door waited on its hinges, reliable as a metronome. She stepped into frame, then out, then in. I let the door close itself for once. Finality has a sound. The latch seated. I turned the deadbolt. The phone stayed outward on my palm. I sent the thread a live window. Delivery showed up green. I held the lens to the floor. Shoes by size. One heel was still glossy, the grit not claiming it yet. It was new to the line. I dragged a finger through the doormat and left a clean valley. The trail ran straight to the kitchen tiles. Pads tell on feet. In the sink sat 2 cups. Same height. One rim stained a pale ring. I set them side by side and let the camera count. 1 cup belonged to a ghost. She stood off to my left, arms pressed against her ribs. Turn it off. Her voice aimed at the phone, not me. I rotated a receipt into the light instead. 6th Street. 12:14 p.m. I let the corner flick and settle. Her phone on the counter showed a blocked out noon. Blocks only hide until they don't. The trash lid lifted under one finger. A citrus peel caught the light, bright as a flare. We don't buy oranges. I did not correct the bin. I walked the lens down the hall. The painting above the thermostat leaned 2 degrees right. Knuckle prints on the lower edge. Someone else steadied themselves here. Bedroom. Nightstands faced each other like guards. 2 chargers lay plugged in. Only one matched our sockets. Duplicates bring their own explanations. The lamp wore a black band at the neck. Elastic, stretched thin. I let it snap softly against the brass. Lamps don't shed. She took a step. Stopped. Her phone buzzed against the counter, then died quiet. She didn't move to it. Silence has protocols. The closet breathed cool air. A dry cleaner tag hung near the back. Store name from across the river. She doesn't cross for errands. I opened the coat by the door and slid a stub from the inside pocket. Theater. Tuesday. Row G. My calendar had Tuesday at home. I tapped the screen and pulled up the viewer list. Names aligned in the corner like witnesses. I didn't greet them. I pointed at the hinge screws I had reset last week. One screw showed a fresh burr. Driver slipped under haste. Open from the outside, closed from the inside. Pressure leaves tiny signatures. She reached for the stream. Stopped an inch short. Enough. She looked at her hand instead of the glass. She counts her own pauses. Her keys hit the table with one ring missing. She slid the spare down the wood toward me. It stopped at the phone. Access edited. I stood the phone upright and framed her in the distance. No filters. No commentary. Eyes level with the lens. Seeing does not blink. I let the lens hold her. She stayed still. The glass stayed full. Seeing does not drink. I set the spare key on the table and turned it once. One ring gone. One given. Who has the missing ring? I asked with the phone still watching. She rubbed her thumb against her palm and kept her eyes on the groove in the wood. Silence is a choice. I opened the thread she uses for Thursdays and pinned the live view. No caption. No emoji. Send. Notifications stacked. The first name turned gray, then bold, then still. They were in the room without walking. A typing bubble rose, paused, disappeared. I put the volume up and placed the phone between us. Audience added. I dragged a folder over the feed. Door logs. Time. Ins and outs. The intervals told their own story. Where were you at 2:17? I asked and tapped that line twice. She touched her necklace and let it fall. Her wrist did not shake. It was nothing, she said, voice thin but level. She gave me the old answer to a filed question. Old answers burn slow. I split the screen. Door camera. Hallway axis. Elevator. The programming had no loyalty. Machines keep their promises. A voice came through the thread. What is this? I held the phone so it took her face and the table clutter at once. Watch, I said, and did not look at the names. Unknown number flashed across the top. It had no name because names are concessions. It buzzed twice and stopped. The log flagged the same number from 2 nights back. Entry at 3:41. Exit at 4:09. Brevity has a pattern. She reached for the spare. Stopped. Pulled her hand back under her sleeve. People always count when they run out of words. Another message landed. Are we live? I muted the thread and let the camera run. Performance without applause. You misled them, I said, and dragged the call history into view. You said I couldn't see? Clarity is quiet. It wasn't about you, she said and looked past the phone, past me, toward the window where her reflection sat on the dark. Deflection is a location. I lifted the spare and pressed it into the grain until it stood by itself. The tiny shadow leaned toward her. Small things choose sides. I don't want them in this, she said, softer now, and turned the spare onto its back with one finger. She chose the gentlest move for the heaviest ask. They're already in it, I said, and unmuted the thread. This is your audience. Transparency is not a kindness. Another call from the same number. I angled the phone so she could read it, and did not answer. Watching is its own reply. She stared at the screen, then at the space where the missing ring used to be. She exhaled through her nose and picked up the glass without drinking. Thirst has rules. I slid the phone closer and let the camera take the edge of her hand, the spare key, the empty ring. The 3 of them made a line. I stayed on it. I tilted the phone toward the table and sent the still to their thread. Her hand, the key, the empty space. The typing dots started and stalled. I let them watch. She pulled her hand back and set the glass down without noise. "Turn it off," she said, eyes on the rim, not me. I opened the door log instead. Silence is a setting. The clip loaded with the green timestamp. The door opened at 2:11. The spare key left its hook and came back at 4:03. The frame didn't blink. She pressed a thumb into her bare knuckle. "It wasn't like that," she said, breath flat. I dragged the slider to the part where the chain sat unlatched. Doors don't change stories. The thread lit up. One of them sent a single question mark. Another sent my name, and then deleted it. I forwarded the clip. She reached for the key and stopped halfway. "We needed space," she said, voice low. I eased the key toward me and kept it there. Space has a cost. I stood and opened the hallway closet. The empty ring box sat behind the winter hats. I set it next to the key and waited. Boxes hold their shape. Her phone buzzed twice and died in her bag. She didn't move to charge it. "You get intense," she said, steady hands on her knees. "Intensity keeps time." I cast the clip to the TV. The door filled the screen and didn't look away. Her shoulders dropped the width of a breath. Screens never blink. I pulled a folded receipt from my wallet and flattened it. Rideshare, 158, drop at our block. Driver's name, timestamp, route. Routes are honest. The thread stopped being cute. One of them wrote stop. Another typed a long message and sent nothing. I sent the second clip and nothing else. Words avoid frames. She looked at the couch cushion where she had buried her hand. "You're humiliating me," she said, stare fixed on the seam. I watched the TV reflect in her glass. Reflection is a witness. The intercom buzzed once and paused. Then twice in a rhythm I knew. I didn't touch it. People announced themselves. I picked up the key and put it in my pocket. "This doesn't leave again," I said, and felt the weight settle. Keys no sides. Her throat moved and stilled. "We weren't," she started, and stopped when the TV flashed the chain again. She folded her arms across the absence. Sentences know when to end. The thread went quiet for a full minute. Then one of them sent a photo of a brunch table from last week. Laughing faces. Her hand under the table. Ring off then too. Old frames tell on new days. I turned off the TV and the room returned. Street noise came in as I cracked the window. Air shifted around us and didn't pick a side. Fresh air doesn't fix fire. I angled the phone back to the line on the table. Box. Key. Finger. I typed 2 words and let them read them in their kitchen light. Vision arrives. The 2 words went out and turned blue. I put the phone down face up. The line stayed on the table. Box. Key. Ring. She rubbed the place the ring had lived. Skin lighter there. She didn't look at the window. The window looked at her. The building's hum carried footsteps when the elevator stopped on our floor. She shifted her chair an inch and let it screech. I didn't move. Doors invite or deny. Metal kissed metal at the lock and then pushed. I had left the chain off. Their voices stayed outside their mouths. They stepped in like the carpet might argue. They saw the table first and me last. One set her bag on a chair and never sat. The other held her phone like it might burn through. We didn't do hello. I nudged the key toward the box with a finger. It spun once and stopped, pointed at them. I leaned back. I wanted hands that weren't hers. The one with the bag opened the box like taking a pulse. Paper stacked tight. 2 hotel sleeves. Printed screen grabs. An envelope with a date written across the flap. Paper doesn't interrupt. She exhaled through her nose and reached for the envelope. I put my hand on the table and didn't let it lift. Her fingers stopped just short. Stopping is a choice. "This is curated," she said, eyes on the paper. She tried to find me instead of the facts and failed. I angled a page so the timestamp owned the room. Her friend with the phone scrolled and compared. She kept swallowing and couldn't finish. "When?" she asked, not looking up. It wasn't a question I enjoyed. I named a week while sliding the ring back into the center. The week landed in all 3 of them. The ring didn't roll. Stability can be cruel. The TV stayed black. I tapped the phone and a silent clip opened. Faces framed by restaurant glass. A hand under a table, ring in a coat pocket. The light had been kind to honesty. Sound wasn't needed. She pressed her tongue against her teeth like it might damn something. "You don't know context," she said, voice steadier than her left knee. She attempted to shift blame with a shrug and a new breath. The shrug didn't catch. I slid one of the hotel sleeves toward the bag. Take it, I said, and looked at the friend, not her. She flinched like the cardboard weighed more than it should. I don't keep items that don't belong to me. The other friend finally sat. The chair took it and didn't squeak. She put the phone face down on the table next to the key and watched the key more than me. Watching the instrument beats watching the cut. She reached for her own phone. I pushed it back with 2 fingers until it hit the envelope. She paused, then left it face down. We were collecting small truths. You planned this, she said, barely above room tone. She glanced at the window and abandoned it. Planning is cheaper than regret. I stood in the room, recalculated heights. I picked up the ring and held it in my palm without closing. Then I set it in the box and closed the lid. The lid's click settled like a verdict. I left the box on the table and unlocked the door chain. Metal on metal, small and final. I sent one word to the thread and slid the phone face down. Come up. She didn't move. Her hand floated near the envelope and stopped. Who? She asked, eyes on the grain of the table. The question sat between us, light and contaminated. Your committee, I said, adjusting the HDMI cable and powering the TV. The input box blinked like a pulse. I cleared a coaster to make room for the laptop. They don't need to be here, she said, voice steady by effort. She took one step toward the window and found the glass had no answers. She stayed. A knock came like it had practiced. I opened the door and stood aside. 2 of them filed in, polite shoulders, polite shoes. Their glances ricocheted off the room's edges. No one asked for water. They hovered near the couch, then sat halfway, back straight, bags in laps. I removed the remote from the armrest and pointed it at their hesitation. No one blinked. I pressed play. The waveform unfolded and her voice arrived in the room without her body. The bar noise in the background, a small laugh, the line about blindness, clear as cleaned glass. Words are heavier when they return. She touched her throat and lowered her hand. The friends looked at her, then at me, then at the carpet. The TV showed the next card, timestamps, doors opening, a calendar entry marked with a class that never met. Silence does more work than commentary. I get it, she said, almost without sound. She folded her fingers and unfolded them. Turn it off. Her eyes stayed on the corner of the screen. The next slide was a map that never left our neighborhood on nights she claimed distance. Receipts matched to times. No speculation, only lines. Seeing everything is simple work. One friend shifted, the fabric of her coat whispering surrender. Why bring us? She asked, knuckles tight around a strap. Her voice tried to make room where there wasn't any. Because stories leak, I said, closing the laptop halfway to mute the screen's glare. This one ends here. It doesn't migrate. I said it to the room, not to her. I set the envelope on the closed ring box and turned both so the flaps faced her. 2 decisions, stacked and aligned. Paper against velvet, either warm. She stared at it and didn't reach. The friends watched the envelope as if it might open itself. People love a door that opens alone. My phone vibrated once in my pocket. The scheduled send ticked toward the edge. I let it approach, then pulled it out and cancelled with a thumb. Deadlines are only real when someone refuses to move them. She exhaled, barely enough to count. Thank you, she said, not looking at anyone. The words stayed small and sought a corner. I'm not doing you a favor, I said, sliding the phone into the center of the table next to the box. I'm doing maintenance. The remote joined the other objects like a tool returned to its hook. The friend nearest the door stood, then remembered her legs and sat again. What do you need us to do? She asked, choosing formality over grace. Her eyes weighed logistics. Stop underwriting, I said. Stop saying blindness when it's convenience. The TV's black screen reflected everyone in a split, expensive way. She lifted the envelope, felt the weight, then put it back exactly where it had been. Her fingers left a trace of oil in the lamplight. Precision is a decision. I'll pack tonight, she said, voice not rising or falling. She looked at the hallway like it might have grown longer. Road distance measured indoors. You'll sort what's yours, I said, returning the chain to the lock without closing it. I'll photograph the rest. Inventory prevents revision. No one stood right away. They synchronized a small intake of breath and broke it at different times. The room held the shape of a finished thing. I took the first photo of the coffee table. 4 coasters, 3 with rings, 1 clean. The clean one slid when I nudged it. And used things move easy. One of her friends reached for the plant on the shelf. The ceramic lip had salt stains where the pot bled last winter. I raised the phone and angled the shot at the crust. Take what you kept alive. She walked to the bedroom doorway and stopped at the line where the rug faded. The habit line. Her hand found the doorframe and didn't lean. I opened the drawer with the chargers. 2 cables wrapped clockwise, one tied in a knot. The knot was hers. I set it on the pile with her name and took the picture before my hand left the frame. We could talk first, someone said, moving toward the sink. I clicked the faucet on and off and watched the drip. The gasket I replace leaks if the handle isn't level. She folded the cardigan off the chair into a square. She didn't press it to her face. She placed it on the edge of the box like it might overbalance weight. The hallway stayed empty behind them. I placed the spare keys in the center of the table, half overlapping a printed list. The metal teeth shined where her ring had worn them smooth. I opened the cupboard with the cups. White mugs, one with a hairline crack into the handle, one pristine. I tapped both with my nail. 2 notes, 2 owners. The smallest friend reached for the framed postcard. I took a picture of the dust outline behind it first. The rectangle was darker by exactly a winter. Suns keep time when people don't. She slid a drawer and paused at the envelopes. These are mine, she said, touching the corner but not lifting. I nodded and photographed the handwriting before the fingers covered the loops. One friend tried to place items in the bag without the table. I lifted them back out in silence and laid them in a line. Sequence makes leaving honest. I set my watch on the counter and tapped the glass. 20 minutes for sorting, then containers. The chain stayed hanging empty above the door. She knelt at the bookshelf and began pulling her titles by instinct. Her gaps drew a map of the hours I kept. The shelf sagged less in the middle when she was done. I took a picture of the couch seat. The center cushion recovered slow from her weight. The right cushion, mine, lifted like it had practice. Cushions remember load. The bathroom light caught the edge of the mirror. I wiped off a half-moon of steam with my palm and counted the prescription labels. Names print truth without tone. She placed an earring on the glass dish. It rolled into a coin and stopped at my finger. I slid it to the edge and clicked. Small things leave larger evidence. The tallest friend opened her mouth like a lesson was coming. I raised the camera and waited for it to pass. Instructions weren't needed here. On the fridge, the magnet list had 3 crossed lines and 1 uncrossed. I took a picture of the uncrossed line and the pen next to it. Intent sits beside neglect. She unpinned a photo of a river bend and put it face down for a second. She flipped it back and tucked it into a book without looking at the cover. Motion hides choices. I opened the hallway closet. The coat she wore in March still held the ticket stub in the pocket. I did not reach in. I photographed the stub through the gap in fabric. Her phone buzzed on the table with the screen down. No one turned it over. The sound stopped without a second vibration. Unanswered things have a weight. I pointed at the last box. Kitchen, then bedroom, I said, stepping aside as they edged past. The camera rested against my thigh and kept time. She brushed the chain with her knuckle as she passed. It swayed once and went back to center. The length of the hall was fixed again. We hadn't started the bedroom. Boxes thumped on the counter. The kettle cord brushed her wrist, and she moved it without looking. I set the camera on the bread box, angled high, and watched its red eye catch. A spoon rattled once and fell quiet. The room took the noise and kept it. Her friends sorted the drawer like it belonged to a stranger. One stacked plates too carefully. The other kept checking the door as if it might close by itself. I flipped the light on over the sink and killed the one in the hall. The line drew itself. Leave the freezer, I said, touching the handle, then letting it swing back. She nodded to no one and kept folding towels. The camera took a soft click I didn't acknowledge. We worked around each other like a diagram. The edge of the counter stayed clean. They finished the last box and taped it with a dull strip. One of them tried to make a joke and let it die on the tile. I picked up the camera and let the strap drag my knuckles. Bedroom, I said, already moving. The hall swallowed our shoes. I opened the door and flicked the switch. The room lit clean and flat. Bed stripped. Floor clear. A folder sat square in the center like a tool. I stood in the doorway and didn't cross the carpet. She paused on the threshold, then stepped in with the same careful heels she used for glass. Take what's yours, I said, setting the camera on the dresser so it saw everything level. Her friends hovered at the wall. The air had angles. She reached for the folder, stopped, and pulled her hand back. I opened it and laid the stills out in a neat line. Dates, times, entries, exits. I used my fingertip to join points without touching her. The page corners stayed flat. One friend shifted and hit the bed frame with her knee. She apologized to the wood. I pressed play on the small speaker and let the bar noise fill the room for 3 seconds. Her voice marked itself against the rest and then cut. I didn't need to explain the sequence. She put both keys on the nightstand without looking at me. Metal against wood, exact. I crossed to the vent, popped the cover, and set the second phone beside them. She noticed the case before the device. Her hand settled on the seam of the carpet. Anything else? I asked, watching the dresser mirror catch all of us and none of us. She shook her head once. I closed the folder and put it back where it started. The room had nothing extra. We carried the last box to the door. One friend opened her mouth and closed it when I held up my hand. The chain hung straight and short. She touched it and didn't push. At the threshold she hesitated, eyes dropping to the groove her bag had worn into the wood. The hallway light made it look like a cut. She stepped over it and didn't look back. I let the door find its frame. The latch caught clean. I shortened the chain 1 link and set it back on the hook. The camera came off the dresser. The battery came out. The drawer took both. I turned off the bedroom light and left the hall as it was. Seeing was finished.